Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome into this late week edition of this episode of New England Sports Weekly. Sorry about the delay there, folks. As Wednesday night was the Bruins playoff game, so as part of the podcast, wanted to include that in our viewership in watching that for everybody. And also, Friday was my birthday, so went out, had a little bit of fun. So I didn't want to end up coming in and doing a half-ass show that day and give you guys a poor product. So that's why I ended up not doing the show on Friday like I had put up on Facebook for everybody to see out on the social media. So today we are doing week 5. We're already in week 5 of the podcast. It doesn't seem like it's been that long. Well, so I'm glad that you stuck with me this long so far into the process. Today is going to be another exciting show as the Bruins have played 4 playoff games. They're up in the series 3 games to 1 versus the Washington Capitals. The Celtics have started their playoff run, and the Boston Red Sox have continued to chug along, and even the New England Patriots have managed to find their way into the landscape of Boston sports. We'll definitely get chugging along on that during this episode. And for any of you wondering and listening into the podcast, I do apologize. I do have some allergies that have kind of popped up, either allergies or a slight cold. I'm not sure exactly what it's been, but I'm going to chug through this. I'm not going to be on the level of the Jordan flu game or anything like that for you. Not claiming that, but we're playing hurt here, so I do apologize for if you hear the cough drop or anything, or anything along that lines, or sound a little nasally. I do apologize for you, but we're gonna soldier along here. We're gonna do our best Michael Jordan Game 6 impression. So without further ado, we will get out of the box, as we always do to begin the show. As you mentioned, the Boston Bruins are in the midst of their playoff run. They are 3-1 versus the Washington Capitals, and they look to close that series out tonight, starting at 7:00 back in Washington. Seeing as they did not have the home ice experience, the home ice advantage, I should say, for the series. They will look to close everything out. And the Boston Celtics did win their playoff game, or I should say their play-in game in their tournament to make it to the actual playoffs. So things are looking pretty good there for the Celtics on that end. They were able to get their matchup. Excuse me, my apologies. Again, sorry about the allergies there, folks. Getting to me here early. But the Celtics did draw a bad matchup with the number 1 overall seeded Brooklyn Nets, who are just loaded this year with Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and James Harden. That trio, their big 3, if you will, out of Brooklyn. So we'll see how that goes for the Celtics, as they've already dropped game 1 of the series. It wasn't a complete blowout. They ended up losing 104-93. So it wasn't a complete disaster like I thought it would be without having Jaylen Brown. And the Boston Red Sox have gone 6-5 over their last 11 games. They just dropped this afternoon's finale against the Philadelphia Phillies. They did take the first 2 games of the series, and they looked pretty good doing it too in that series. So they ended up going 4-2 overall on their road trip when they went down to Dunedin, Florida, to play the Blue Jays, who are displaced from their normal home out of Toronto because of COVID. And they won't let the Blue Jays back in because of a whole situation with other teams having to come back into Canada and having to deal with all the customs, all their COVID, whatever you want to call it, BS, however you want to describe it. But we all know over the last year and a half how this has all gone. So I can only imagine how having to get 25 players plus a coaching staff and all the team officials, whoever you need to get across the border just to go play a 3 or 4 game setup in Toronto. So that's why they ended up going to Dunedin, and now they're going to Buffalo. But regardless of that, the Red Sox took care of business against the Blue Jays and against the Philadelphia Phillies. Just got to keep winning those series, and that's what they continued to do. And the New England Patriots, as I mentioned off the top of the show, have continued to make some noise here in the offseason, albeit this time it's just some rumors, not substantiated, but not ones that you'd find off of Johnny128 on Twitter or whoever you would say has a account there that just decides to try to make up some news to try to get some clicks on their feed. A lot of sources out there from Boston Sports, New England, NBC Sports Boston. I was getting some of their shows mixed up. NBC Sports Boston, the NFL Network. A lot of reputable sources out there have reported that Julio Jones is most likely going to be traded this offseason, as he is not happy with his situation with Matt Ryan. He's even complained that Matt Ryan's lost some arm strength. Now, when we get into the Patriots, we'll talk about a certain quarterback that wears number 1 and does a Superman celebration that we all know his arm strength isn't all that great anymore anyways. So I'm not sure why Julio would want to come here for that. But selfishly, of course, all the Patriots fans out there, including myself, are now daydreaming of Julio Jones in a number 11 jersey. I have to give Edelman a call and just get his blessings to take up the number 11 jersey and keep on honoring that tradition. But the Patriots are knee-deep in those rumors, and hopefully that comes to fruition here after June 1st. And again, we will get into that later on when we touch on Julio Jones and the Patriots. So that is your out-of-the-box segment for week number 5. And now we will jump right on into the topic du jour of the Boston Bruins. And as we talked about here a few times already early on in the broadcast, the Boston Bruins are now 3-1 in their first round against the Washington Capitals. And now the Bruins look to close everything out tonight. Excuse me. Bear with me here for a moment. As the Boston Bruins look to close everything out against the Washington Capitals and move on to round number 2. Now things have gone not the way that you probably would have expected, at least in the first couple games of this series, where these Boston Bruins did not get the production from the top line that they expected, at least in the first 2 games. And of course, after game 1, everybody was ragging on Tuukka. That was ridiculous. The hate that Tuukka Rask gets in this town it astonishes me here. I don't get it. The man now has the most playoff victories for a goaltender in the history of the Bruins franchise, with 53 passing Gary Cheevers. With the last Bruins win, excuse me, sorry. Again, I apologize about my allergies. But Tuukka Rask has been nothing but an outstanding goaltender for this franchise. He may not have stolen a series like Tim Thomas did, and I know Tim Thomas gets all the love, gets all the adulation, all the cheers from all the fan base because of that 2011 Cup run, where the Boston Bruins went on a magical run, won the Cup. Tim Thomas in the last 2 rounds absolutely stood on his head and beat the Lightning and beat the Vancouver Canucks to get the Bruins their first Cup in 39 years. So, of course, you win a Cup, and fairly so, you get all the awards. You're the big man on campus. You get to walk around holding your head up high, holding that cup around your head, and it's been and trust me, I remember watching that series. It was fun to watch Tim Thomas and that group bowl through the playoffs, and they won that great series against Montreal in the first round, winning in 7 games and knocking them off their vaunted rival, the Red Sox and Yankees of hockey, if you will, for those who don't follow hockey as closely. So it really does irritate me that Tuukka Rask gets this hate from, not from all the fan base, because he has his detractors, he has his supporters. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's 50-50. I would say you probably 75% of the fan base, or maybe more, does stand up for him a lot of the time. But of course, in Boston, big sports market, we all know, we're all one of them, diehard sports fans. So that section, that 25%, 15%, whatever chunk of that you want to put the Tuukka haters in, they're all very loud when in that minority that talks about their hatred for Tuukka. And they were just waiting after that first loss in the first overtime for Tuukka just to slip up, which he didn't. He played really well. He didn't pull excuse me, he didn't pull the Samsonov move from game 2, which we'll get to here in a moment. But basically, Tuukka has played his ass off in his career, and I don't get it. Yeah, the 2013 Cup run wasn't his best when they made it to the Stanley Cup Finals against the Blackhawks, but come on, that Blackhawks team was loaded. Taves, Kane, Duncan. I mean, that group is a dynasty. They won 3 cups in that time span. And they basically they ran into the dynasty of the early 2010s in the Blackhawks. So that was probably one of the toughest runs that they had to go through playing in 2013 that I remember. And obviously they were playing for the city of Boston after the marathon bombing. So a lot of emotion going into that. But basically what my point here with Tuukka is, he is one of the best goaltenders they've ever had in this franchise, arguably the best goaltender. But because he came up right behind Tim Thomas, he was on that 2011 squad, and because he hasn't, quote unquote, stood on his head to steal a series, which I think that's also a lie. I mean, that 2013, 2014 Eastern Conference Finals against the Pittsburgh Penguins, he did that. He stood on his head, in my opinion. He shut them out in that series, and especially in that closing game as well. So Tuukka has been everything that you could ever ask for in a goaltender. It's in the 2019 Cup run, when they made it to the Stanley Cup Finals and lost in Game 7 against the Blues. I put more of that blame on Marchand and that first line for that the Bruins have had. So I don't begrudge Tuukka at all. I'm, as you can tell, solely on the Tuukka train. I'll back him up all day long. He's my goaltender. Now, obviously, I do love Jeremy Swayman. He is the future of the team. But that being said, I'll ride Tuukka until the wheels fall off, or until the Bruins decide that they want to move on from him, or if Tuukka decides that he wants to retire, which he has talked about. There have been rumors that have been floating around with Tuukka, if he wants to retire. If he plays, he said he only ever wants to play for the Boston Bruins. So I don't see Tuukka leaving anytime soon to go to a different team. And I don't see him retiring. I don't see anything he's ever said that said he was going to retire. Again, my apologies, folks, for the allergies. But again, Tuukka is, you can win a cup with Tuukka. It's just you've run into some bad situations here. going forward with just some fluke situations that have happened. And it really has been the lack of scoring on the second and third lines and fourth lines for this team that's really caused them some issues in the past when Tuukka has been their starter. So, which this year they've gotten that second line of scoring. So I honestly think this is going to be the year that they finally break through since 2011. So, and they've looked really strong against Washington. Now, game 2, they had to come up with a big win, in my opinion, because you don't want to go down that series 0-2 without home field advantage, home ice advantage, especially against the Capitals, who in the playoffs with similar guys that have played on this franchise, Ovechkin, Backstrom. Now, obviously, you don't have Holtby anymore in net. It's Samsonov, the goaltender, or however you should pronounce that. I never know everybody. I used to call it Samsonov, but got to put the pronunciation on it. God forbid. So the Boston Bruins were able to pull off a overtime victory against the Washington Capitals and were able to get a great goal with 39 seconds into the first overtime. It was the second quickest, actually, no, my apologies, the first quickest overtime goal in the history of the Boston Bruins when Brad Marchand basically kind of bunted that into the back of the goal net. So that first line, they didn't show up for most of the game as far as on the stat sheet. Then finally, Marchand was able to make his appearance in overtime and came up huge. And then, of course, when you roll everything over to game 3, now this is where you started to see the first line. You started to see some of those superstars that the Bruins have come up and make plays. Now, you didn't see huge stats for the team from Marchand, Bergeron, and Pasternak and Taylor Hall. It's not like they were lighting up the scoreboard, but they you could see where Bruce Cassidy lit a fire under their ass and was starting to get to them and was telling them that you have to drag this team along. And the quote after the overtime victory, which we'll get to that here in a second as well, was basically just Marchand, and this was coming from Taylor Hall, their trade acquisition at the deadline, who's been has been gold for this team. He told the media that Brad Marchand was going to put this team on his back and drag them to the victory, basically, is what was going to happen. And as we saw, that's basically what Marchand's done pretty much since game number 2. They pretty much have relied on Marchand and Bergeron. Pasternak started to kind of light things up here. The lights come on, I should say, over Pasternak. So that first line, everybody's starting to click now. And then Taylor Hall, who had an amazing goal in game 3 when the Bruins were trailing to tie things up at 1-1 at the time, where basically he was right at the right side of the net, got the puck, kind of did a little bit of a half spin, and then pushed the puck up into the corner of the net. And I'm not any hockey expert as far as taking trick shots there, but I mean, come on, he has ultimate skills there as far as Taylor Hall is concerned. So definitely you can see where he has come in and made a huge difference for this team. And we've seen it already in the playoffs. So Taylor Hall has been worth every penny. They pretty much fleeced Buffalo, in my opinion. So they've gotten a steal, and he's helped them big in the playoffs so far. And in game number 3, I mean, the biggest thing that they had was in overtime when Samsonov just had the most bonehead play I've seen in a long time in any sport. So when you have all that traffic out in front of your net in overtime, I get it. You already played one complete overtime of 20 minutes. So that's 120 minutes of hockey already. And then you tack on what you've played, the 6-7 minutes that you've played in overtime. So almost been an hour and a half of hockey. And then he comes out of the net with traffic in front of his net, tries to play the puck, and doesn't get back in time. And Craig Smith just steals the goal, steals the puck, and slides that right underneath his leg before he's able to get settled again. So, I mean, as a Boston Bruins fan, I'll take that all day long. I loved it. It was amazing. I was jumping and hooting and hollering and screaming, and I was having a time of my life there after he scored that overtime goal. Playoff hockey is just on another level. It's amazing to watch. The energy. If you haven't checked in, you got to check in now and watch some of those playoff games. They are so fun to watch. And Craig Smith stole the night there. Literally stole the puck from out behind the net. Gets the overtime winner, but Samsonov is just going to be the GOAT in Washington here if this series doesn't go their way, doesn't come back in their favor. But as far as he's concerned, I think he's going to be in a world of trouble, though, because I don't think they're going to come back in this series. I think Boston's going to win this one tonight and close this series out, and they're just going to put a capper on this one. So Samsonov is going to be the GOAT in Washington for a long time. Even though he might be one of their top prospects as far as goaltenders go, he really didn't do himself any favors over this series. Just imagine if that was Tuukka. And we all know how I feel about Tuukka, one of the greatest goaltenders in the history of the Bruins, and I'll always be on his back defending him. But if that happened in this town, if Tuukka did that, oh my God, he would get ripped to shreds. There would be nothing left of Tuukka if that happened, at least from the haters. No, obviously, people on my side of the fence, which I believe there's probably about 75, 80%, or however you want to look at it, that are Tuukka fans, that do appreciate what Tuukka has brought to this team over all these years. But if we're being honest here, Tuukka would have gotten ripped to shreds after that goal, if that was him. So I'm glad it wasn't Tuukka, and I'm glad it was Tim Anderson, just because I wouldn't want to see those knives getting thrown at Tuukka, because it just seems like every single time that he just has one little misstep. Nothing, and I'm not talking something like this, what Craig Anderson did, Samsonov did for the Capitals. But if he just misplayed something, didn't cost them a goal right away, or if he just misplays something the wrong way, a stiff breeze comes by, there are going to be those Boston Bruins fans out there, that 15%, 20%, that minority that hates Tuukka for whatever reason, would have been all over his back. And it's sad, just because why do you have to be so angry? Why do you have to be so pissed off about Tuukka? I get it. You haven't technically won a cup with him as a starter, but they've gotten to the finish line. They've gotten an inch away from the finish line. They've been there with Tuukka. Like I said, he's stolen series. So, man, I'm just glad that was on Samsonov, because, man, that was. I don't listen to a lot of Washington sports talk radio. I should have on that day, just to see how their marketplace was going that day, just to see the reaction. Now I know that they're not a big hockey town like Boston is. Boston might be professionally the best hockey town in all of the NHL, and I'm talking North America. I'm excluding Canada, because we know hockey is number one. It's the NFL of Canada, basically. The ratings rule up there with the NHL. So I'm not going to touch that. I'm talking about in the 48 states. Boston, maybe Detroit. I wouldn't put, even though Chicago has been there for a long time, they're really, maybe Buffalo, even though they suck as a franchise, there is a lot of hockey players that come out of there, and their hockey is a pretty big sport out of Buffalo. The Wild fans I wouldn't throw in there, even though there are a lot of hockey players that come out. I just don't hear a lot about the Wild fan base, but getting off the tracks there a little bit. But basically, my point is Boston Bruins fans are uber passionate. So I understand why people get on the backs of somebody. I've done it in other sports. I've picked on players myself, and I'm sure it's going to happen in this podcast. If everybody keeps listening and everybody keeps subscribing and liking, and you like what you hear, I'm sure there's going to be an episode where I'm going to rip a player to shreds because he did something I didn't like. So I know I'm probably going to sound like a hypocrite from you pull up whatever episode 2 years down the line, you're like, oh, Sean ripped player X, player Y, or whoever it was. And you can go back to these comments. But still, I just think that all the vitriol and all the hate that Tuukka gets is unfair. So my point being is I'm just glad that Samsonov, this was on Samsonov's end and not on Tuukka's. And I'm sure if he lived here in Boston or played for the Bruins, I'm sure he would have gotten a lot worse than from whatever he had to hear from the Washington, D.C. fans, from those Caps fans. They just don't strike me as the most hockey-forward sports town. I think it's really a Washington football team. I saved myself from the you-know-what team name that everybody keeps referring them to. I almost did it. And then I probably put the basketball team with the Wizards and then the Nationals. But I'm not going to sit here and start talking Washington sports other than the Caps. But the Capitals and the Bruins, as I mentioned, will try to finish this series off tonight. And hopefully the Bruins can hold up their end of the bargain here. And as I talked about last week in our episode, I believe the Bruins are going to make it all the way to the Stanley Cup finals this year. I really do. I really believe in this team. I think they have a great group of players that they've assembled. And finally, like I mentioned, they have that secondary scoring, and it's starting to come around here in this series as we've gotten 4 games in, about to get to 5 games in just under an hour here as we timestamp this podcast. So the Boston Bruins are looking pretty good as we head into Game 5. They ended up pummeling the Washington Capitals, making them pay. They basically paid them back for all the power play goals that they did not score early on in this series, as they pummeled the goaltender Samsonov, and they ended up winning 4-2 in Game 4 of that series. If you can remember back early on, Alexander Ovechkin on a dumb penalty by Marchand made them pay early on, about 15 seconds into that power play. And the Bruins really, to that point, they had the 1 power play goal out of 5 attempts, but they really didn't look great. It was lackluster. And then in this game on Friday night, they came to play. They knew they had to play a lot better on that power play unit, on that special teams, because when you get that extra attacker out on the ice, you can't squander that, or at least for a large majority of the time, you can't. You have to take advantage of those situations when the other team is down and make them pay for those stupid penalties. And don't even get me started on that penalty that should have been called against the Capitals when Miller for the Bruins got laid out when the Washington Capitals forward just leaped off of both his skates. And now I'm not saying he leaped 10 feet in the air, but you could see he was probably a good 8 inches off the ice, launches himself towards the head, mind you, and he gets just a double minor. That should have been a major penalty. And Wyatt, even though the Bruins scored a power play goal, got up 1-0 at the time, what irritates me is that he should have gotten a major penalty. So for those of you who don't follow hockey, when you get a major, that means that's a 5-minute penalty instead of 2 minutes, or in this case, it was a double minor, so 4 minutes. But if it's a major penalty, that 5-minute penalty does not expire even if you get a goal. It goes through the whole 5 minutes. So it should have been that major penalty. Now, looking back at it, I mean, they won 4-2, so you can't really complain a lot about this series so far, and especially the last game, how it went. But still, I mean, that would have been something that would have seriously changed the complexion of that game early on. If let's just say that they score 2, you're up 2-0, then that really, really puts Washington in a bad position. And maybe you get really lucky, you score 3. I don't think that would happen, just because Washington has a pretty good penalty kill. So I think that they probably would have gotten 2 out of it. But my point being, that would have been a game changer, a game wrecker in the Bruins' favor early on in the game. Now, luckily, the Bruins came out firing all the way through 3 periods. They didn't let up. I've seen some games there, even under Bruce Cassidy, where it kind of seems like they lose steam in some of those playoff games in the 3rd period, but it may cost them, or the other team may come back to tie. So it does kind of get irritating a little bit, but this time they finished all the way through. They came out on top 4-2. And tonight they have a chance to close everything out, win the series, move on to round number 2 in the Eastern Conference semis. And hopefully we get to talk about that on Wednesday night. Well, we might even get the chance to do that on Wednesday either way, because again, we're shooting on Sunday this week in our non-normal spot. So between maybe after tonight or by the time Wednesday rolls around, this series will be closed out here as we head on to the semis. Now, another playoff team that shares the Boston Garden are the Boston Celtics. They won their play-in game, so their reward was to get the Brooklyn Nets. Yay. You know what that means? You get to face the number 1 seed, Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant, after Kevin Durant had to sit out last year with his season-ending knee injury, and James Harden just was acquired this year. So that super team was 1 year behind, but they are finally on the court and assembled. Now, the first game actually did not do too bad as far as the Celtics were concerned. They were heading into the 4th quarter. It was 79-72, which I'm surprised that it was even that close. It really was. I thought it was going to be a blowout. I thought it was going to be a 4-game sweep. And it doesn't mean that it still won't be, because the Nets won the first one. But my point is that I thought this would just be a walkthrough series here for the Nets, because it's really just Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker at this point. And then everybody else is going to show up, because as we all know, Jaylen Brown is out for the year. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that ligament tear that he has. It's not an ACL. It's not something like that. It's one of those ones where you have to go to medical school for 80 years to know the name of it. But the point being is that he's out for the year, and there goes your second best player on the team. And even with Jaylen, you might have won 1, maybe 2 games My apologies, folks. It's allergy season, and it's hitting me hard the last couple days. So I thank you that you're bearing through this, and hopefully next week we'll go off without a hitch. So my apologies. But anyways, the Boston Celtics are down to Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker at this point when facing the best team, not just the Eastern Conference, in my opinion, in the NBA, because LeBron James and Anthony Davis have been banged up this year. It's not the same Lakers team. They had to actually play in the play-in tournament mainly because their superstars were hurt for a majority of the season. But, I mean, they're really the team that is probably going to come out of the West now that they're healthy again. But now the Celtics have the luxury of having if you're living in a luxury hotel in hell, I guess, if you're the Celtics, that you get to face the Nets. And of course, you get to face Kyrie Irving for the first time since he's come back to Boston. And this time there will be I shouldn't say the first time, but what I meant to say is it'll be the first time that he gets to see the fans in the Garden after he stabbed everybody in the heart, after he stood in a season ticket holder meeting with cameras and said that I'll be back, I'll sign here, to all those Bruins faithful a couple of years ago before he ended up signing with the Nets last offseason. So, of course, we've had COVID, so he wasn't there. Or I should say the fans weren't there when he came back. He was hurt, so he didn't make the trip. And then this year, before fans were allowed back in the Garden, he had that whole weird sage burning to cleanse the Garden, which I don't know what you're cleansing it of. We needed to cleanse you with your attitude that got so annoying after about midway through your last year here. And yeah, you're a superstar, but man, you piss me off. Just to listen to you talk about some of the things, and I get it. Sports aren't everything. I get it. I totally do. I understand. But still, you're getting paid $35, $40 million. And then you started to pull this crap since you went over to the Nets. Right before the playoffs started, you, in a press conference, told a reporter that basketball is not everything. I have a lot on my mind. And you just sounded like a complete idiot, like a dope. Why? Why can't you focus on both? Everybody else in their life has to focus on multiple things. Why can't you, Kyrie? I'm sorry that you're getting paid $35 million a year to dribble a goddamn basketball and play in the playoffs. Yes, you're a human being. I get it. Things happen in the world. And I like to think that I'm a compassionate person myself. I'm not just all selfish. I try to help others, but there's a time and a place when the basketball season's over, or hell, when the game is over, or 3 hours before you have to go to the game. You could do some fundraising or make some calls and help people out or whatever. I'm all for you helping people, but man, to throw it in people's faces, that's what irritates me. It's like, why do you have to use this as an excuse? Oh, just in case you lose and you get your ass beat somewhere down the line in the playoffs? Oh, sorry, I wasn't focused. I was just thinking about X, Y, and Z situation that I didn't have any control of, or something along those lines. But anyways, it just gets infuriating with having to deal with Kyrie. So my whole point of him having to come back to the Garden in this playoff series is he will have to face the fans this time, because the Boston Garden opens up to full capacity back to 100% on May 29th. So he'll have to play at least one game back in the Garden. So I believe the first home game would be the 28th. Hopefully, maybe the city will kind of give them a little bit of a boost or a little bit of a break and let them bring in some more fans instead of 25%. But either way, the 25% or when he has to actually eventually face over the capacity crowd, maybe he'll get his comeuppance and get booed and unmercifully get booed because he deserves everything he gets. I don't actually hate him as a person. He just is so infuriating. He's just so hard to deal with. Yes, you're a basketball genius. You're a great player. You're a top 15 player in the league. And I wish that his head wasn't so far up his ass that the Celtics could have kept him. Because if he wasn't so about himself and didn't cause problems in the locker room, I certainly believe he would have been part of this team's future. It's just so difficult to try to listen to him all the time. And oh man, so this series might not be me more hating on the Nets, but more hating on Kyrie. And I really wish the Celtics were at full strength, maybe to have a puncher's chance, which I still don't think that they're going to be. They're going to have much of a chance at all. Even though the first game went better than I thought, I still just don't see how they're going to be able to pull this one out without Jaylen Brown. Jason Tatum's going to have to drop a minimum of 50 each night, and he only put up 22. I say only 22, but he put up a 22-point performance in game one. They're going to need Kemba to really, really come up big. And then you're going to have Evan Fournier come up big. Some of those rookies that I don't have a lot of confidence in, maybe Pritchard, maybe Neesmith out on the wing, come in and drop a 15, maybe a 20-point game here during the series, and you can steal a game. I don't think it's going 7 at all. I think this is going to be a gentleman's sweep because after seeing that first game, I do think that the Celtics might steal 1, but it's going to be a gentleman's sweep here. The Nets take this in 5 games and mercifully put the Celtics to bed and put them out of their misery. And hopefully Danny Ainge makes some changes here, but it doesn't look that promising. He had his interview with 98.5 The Sports Hub in Boston, his weekly appearance, and also was interviewed by Dan Shaughnessy. And it just doesn't seem like he's willing to make that gigantic big move that is what's going to be required for this team to actually make it deeper into the playoffs and shake things up. He was basically asked if he would trade one of those superstars, mainly Jaylen Brown. And basically his response was, no, why would we do that? What do you want us to do? Well, that's what he ended up telling Dan Shaughnessy. And it's just kind of disheartening from that standpoint. It's because this mix has been together for 4-5 years now, and the results just haven't been there. Now, obviously, Jason Tatum is a foundational piece. He's one of those young guns that you can build around. He's a franchise player, so definitely they have to keep him and build around him. But I just don't see how bringing this team back together for a 5th or 6th season together again, it's the definition of insanity. You're going to keep banging your head against the wall and expecting things to change, but it's going to be the same. Even if you got to like the Eastern Conference Finals, so we've seen that movie before. You haven't broken through. It's just maddening with Danny Ainge sometimes how he runs this franchise. And I'm not a Danny protractor at all. I like Danny. Yes, he brought that team a title back in 2008. He's made some good moves, but this is the point where you've hit your head against a brick wall. You're up against that wall now. You need to break through. You need to make some moves. Now, it's going to have to be through the trade market just because the rest of the free agent pool, the draft class, because they're not going to get any good draft position. That's not how they're going to build this team for the next few years. They're going to have to go into the trade market and see what they can get. We'll touch on that later on in the summer once we get some more clear options of what's going to be available for the Celtics in the trade market. But we'll move on down the road, down to Yawkey Way, or Jersey Street as it's called now, to Fenway Park, as their inhabitants, the Boston Red Sox, are now 29 and I believe it's 18 on the season. They went 11 games over 500. Now, as I mentioned, they did drop today's game 6-2, but they ended their road trip on a 6-4 note. I'm sorry, a 4-2 note. I was looking at the record before over their last 10 games, so forgive me on that one. But they were 4-2 over the road trip. They took 2 out of 3 from the Blue Jays, and then they took 2 out of 3 from the Phillies. So the Boston Red Sox have continued to stay hot. Now, the unfortunate aspect for the Red Sox is that so haven't the Yankees and so haven't the Tampa Bay Rays. The Tampa Bay Rays have actually, as of today, have won 10 straight ball games. And then the Yankees are 8-2 over that stretch as well. So basically, their division is going to be a crapshoot till we get to September, because yes, I still wholeheartedly believe in this Red Sox team, and I think that they're going to end up winning this division. I know a lot of people out there probably think I'm crazy for saying that. Like I said at the beginning of the year, I wouldn't have said that, but just now that we're 5 months into this process, not 5 months, now that we're 5, 6, 7 weeks into the process, we're almost to the end of May. What have they shown you that says that this isn't sustainable? We're not a 2-day, 2-week fluke stretch that we're dealing with here. This is a 2-month sample size. That's big enough for me to say that this team is for real. And what just drives me crazy, because I've seen it over probably the last week or so, last 2 weeks, just reading things that, okay, they have JD Martinez, Rafael Devers, and Xander Bogaerts in middle of the order. That's pretty much it. And then this pitching staff is mediocre. Now, we could have a conversation about that pitching staff here in a second, if they are really mediocre or not. But to me, that's a lazy take to sit there and say that it's just Rafael Devers, Xander Bogaerts, and JD Martinez in the middle of the order is carrying this whole team, and that's it. You haven't been watching this damn team, if that's your opinion. Now, the leadoff spot needs a little work, but Alex Verdugo, he has been fine. He was a steal in that Mookie Betts trade. Now, obviously, he's not Mookie Betts. Nobody's ever going to be Mookie. In my opinion, Mookie's the second best player in baseball, so you're not going to replace him. But Verdugo does bring a lot of energy. He's got some pop. He's got about 20, 25 home run power in that bat, which out of the 2-hole, I'll take that all day long. And he's hitting close to 300. For a while, he was hitting well over 300. And he is a run producer. He runs the bases pretty well. He plays a pretty good right and center field, or wherever you stick him in the outfield. He's a good defensive outfielder. Not to level Mookie again, but still, you didn't get a scrub. You got a guy that could be an all-star at some point in time, make maybe 5 all-star teams. So you got a good player back. So that's your 2-hole hitter. Then you go to JD. Then you go to Rafael Devers. Xander Bogaerts usually hits in front of Rafi. And then you put Rafi in the 5-hole. And then, you have Christian Vasquez, who in this day and age of hitting catchers, I mean, it's really JT Realmuto with the Phillies and Contreras with the Cubs. Those are really the only 2 big-time hitting catchers, because a lot of the others have kind of fallen off, because Buster Posey isn't the same Buster Posey of 2010 or 2012. So we're not really in a great era of hitting catchers anymore. So as far as Vasquez is concerned, he's really turned himself into a pretty good hitting catcher. A couple of years ago, he hit 20 plus bombs, 23 to be exact, and he's turned himself into a pretty good hitter. So if that's your 6-hole hitter, that's pretty damn good. Oh, and then Hunter Renfroe, we all know Hunter Renfroe is not going to be a 275, 280, even 300 hitter. Yeah, he's going to hit 220, maybe 240 at most. But you know what he's going to do? A run producer. And then he's going to smash the ball over the fence for 25, 30 times a year and drive in 80 to 95 runs for you. And that's your 7-hole hitter, guys. What do you want? Oh, and then, Bobby Dahlback. Guess what Bobby Dahlback is starting to do now? He's starting to rake himself. He's starting to hit home runs. He's starting to drive in runs. And he might. I think he's going to hit better than Hunter Renfroe is eventually. His watermark will come up. And I don't think he's ever going to be batting champion, but I think he's a guy that can consistently be in that 260, 280 range. And as a first baseman, as a power bat, which that's what he profiles as, I'll take that all day long. You're not always going to get Albert Pujols, Joey Votto, and I mean Albert Pujols in his prime, not Albert Pujols now who just signed with the Dodgers. I'm talking about the prototypical first baseman that has been there for a long time in baseball, where you're a slugger. You're not up there to be a complete hitter. Now, if you can become that, I'm not going to say anything. I'll happily take that for you. So I'm happy with what they've gotten so far out of Bobby now that he started to come around and started to be that player that we all thought that he was going to be. He had a rough month and a half-ish there for a while, but he's really started to hit to what his early back of the baseball card is. This is technically his rookie year, but I'm talking about what we've seen from him out of the minors. So I've liked what I've seen so far. Now the pitching surprisingly has been pretty well. Again, I know we talk about this every week, but this pitching staff is pretty much given them 5+ innings every night. And in modern baseball, you can't call 5 and dive anymore just because the 6-7+ innings of a quality start has gone away. That's not the case anymore. 5 innings is really what you look for out of a start. I know there's going to be those anomalies, and trust me, I want to see them go 6, 7, 8 innings a night and save that bullpen, especially with this bullpen, because that has been the weak link to this team. So that's been the one area where I've kind of been a little disappointed with this team. But overall, starting staff-wise, you can't ask for much more in a modern era. They've really pitched very well. Even from guys like Martin Perez, who I just thought he was another spare part that they brought back. And when they brought him back, I just was not excited at all. I'm like, this is a guy last year who at times would get shelled and pitch well. He's come back, though. He has an ERA under 3.34, which is surprising because he's usually a guy that's in the high 4s, low 5s. So this isn't a guy that you usually are going to rely on, but he's come in the bottom of that pitching lineup. Then Garrett Richards, who I've bagged on. You know, guys know I've bagged on him for that jacket comment that he had when he had to pitch in the cold. But it really has been a pretty good turnaround since he got shelled early on in a couple starts. He really has pitched to what he used to be with the Angels when he was their staff ace. Now, if you can get that out of your 4-hole production and your pitching staff, I'll take that all day long if that's your 4. Like I said, I'm happy that that's happened. Like I said, I wanted him gone. I wanted Tanner Houck, which he still at some point might come up here after he rehabs. So that's even stronger. Now, the one concerning part has been Erod, who did get lit up for 4 runs in the first inning today. So he's had a tough patch here over the last 3 or 4 starts. he just doesn't look the same. If you've watched him, he doesn't look like 2019 Erod, 2018 Erod before he went down with a knee injury. He struggled to find that really good command. Now, he hasn't been like wild to say that now, but he hasn't been pinpoint accurate like he has been. And the velocity on his fastball has been down a couple miles an hour because he normally sits around 96 on average, will top out around like 97, 98 occasionally when he really needs to hump up and get it. But normally it's in that 90, 95, 96 range. And it's kind of been some games sitting at that 93, 94, not that same late life. And his off speed hasn't been the same as well. So it's really been kind of disappointing from what we've gotten back from Erod. Now, we all do have to keep in mind that he had not the COVID itself, but he ended up developing the myocarditis from after COVID, which with myocarditis was the heart issue that he developed. So he did get a major heart issue that he ended up developing that he had to get shut down for all of last year. So you do have to give him that this is his first year back after having to deal with the myocarditis. Now, he did kind of turn things around here in today's start, so maybe that's a good sign as we move forward. Maybe he's kind of getting back on track. Now, it is a long season. You make 32 starts, so it could end up being just a blip on the radar here for him over this last 4 games. But it is, if you're looking for one of the blemishes on this roster so far, you could point to that one. And the bullpen has just kind of been up and down outside of Matt Barnes because Matt Barnes is unhittable. He's only blown 1 save, and he did that against the Angels. And he gave up a blue pit to Mike Trout, who's the best player in all of baseball. And then Shohei Ohtani, who is an absolute phenom. He's basically, I know we've had some other two-way players that have kind of like been those mythical beasts and kind of shown up there, but he really has come along, and he's the first true two-way superstar since Babe Ruth. And I'm not being hyperbolic here. That really is the case because he's leading the league in home runs, and he has a sub-3 ERA on the mound. So, I mean, he's a stud. And he hit that 2-run home run off of Matt Barnes. So the Red Sox weren't able to pull that one out of the jaws of defeat there. But that's his only blown save. Now, the rest of the bullpen has not been pretty, to say the least here. Adam Ottavino, who I thought might be the closer, because I'll be honest, Matt Barnes coming in was not my choice to be the closer at all, to be honest. I really thought that Ottavino could be the closer because he did it in Colorado. He didn't do it last year in New York just because they have Aroldis Chapman and then Zach Britton, who's already been there as well. So I didn't think he was going to be there, but here he had an open opportunity because there's no set closer. The Red Sox traded Brandon Workman last year, but Ottavino at a minimum should have been your shutdown setup guy, and he's had some shaky outings. And Darwinson Hernandez has command issues that, if you've ever seen the movie Major League, just reminds me of Rick Vaughn. He's got a powerful fastball, can go up there at 99. I've seen it touch 100 at times. Normally sits around 97. Got a good changeup, good off speed, but he just has some bad. He'll just make you scratch your head on where that ball's going at times. But then he'll have a couple outings where he'll end up striking out the side and looking like, man, he could be the closer of the future here. He could be the next Chapman because he's a left-handed. So you're like, oh, he could blow people away and be that dominant closer. And then he'll come out the next night and then go back to being Wild Thing out there on the mound. So it's just really hard to kind of get a gauge on what you're going to get out of him. Then they finally got rid of Austin Bryce, who I don't know why the hell he was on this roster to begin with. He did not impress me in spring training, didn't impress me in the first week, second week, whatever week we're in, whatever day we're in, whoever he faced, did not impress me. Finally, he got cut as they brought up Danny Santana to play first base and second base as well. So you've got another guy that is another versatile outfielder, first base, utility, platoon type of guy that you can bank on to give you more production than Franchy Cordero. But basically, you replaced some infield and outfield production. You replaced the bullpen production with the infield and outfield production of Santana after getting rid of Bryce, who should have never been on this roster to begin with. Now, the rest of the bullpen is still up in the air as far as what their roles are, who's coming in what position. So this is one of those areas where, they're going to have to work on this in the offseason. Not the offseason. I was just thinking about the Patriots there for a second. But in the trade deadline, as we creep up to that here in July. So it'll be interesting to see what route they go in, if they want to maybe get another starter, but then you have Chris Sale coming back, or if you want to focus on that bullpen, because I think you're going to have the help in the outfield with Jarren Duran, the former Sea Dog, now up with Pawtucket, who is just ripping the cover off the ball, went 5 for 5 the other day, had 2 monster shots, added that power to the game. So I think probably by July we'll see him. So I think you're really going to have to focus on the bullpen when it comes to the trade deadline. And speaking of trades, the New England Patriots were just recently in the news because Julio Jones is asking out of Atlanta. Now, Julio Jones is a 12-year vet. He's already a Hall of Famer. First round, first ballot. He's that good already. Now, he has been amazing over those 12 years. He's right there with Antonio Brown, Larry Fitzgerald, you name anybody. He's right in the top 3 of probably all those categories. Touchdowns is the one area where he has had some issues, but to me, from having him on my fantasy team and watching a lot of Julio Jones over the last 5-6 years, it really has been the play calling of that putrid coaching staff that they've had down in Atlanta. Man, it's frustrating to watch him sometimes. But as far as not Julio, but I'm talking about that coaching staff and just their mishandling of Julio in the red zone. But he wants out of Atlanta, and he is looking to find a quarterback that has some good arm strength, because reportedly the reports that are out there are that he wants that Matt Ryan and his arm strength is kind of declining. So he wants to go to a place where the quarterback has a better arm, where he can get him some deep balls in those type of situations. And the ironic thing is, in a report that Michael Hawley of NBC Sports Boston, who wrote the War Room book and has been around New England for a long time, is a respected journalist, talk show host, TV host, and has always had his hands in the New England pie, so to speak. He's had a lot of good resources down there, and spoke with Thomas Dimitroff about Julio Jones for one of his books. So he has some good insight. Was told that Julio Jones would like to play with Cam Newton. And I know you're probably sitting there going like, wait a second, that's who he wants to play with. If Matt Ryan's arm is shot at this point, is Julio? I mean, Julio wants to play with Cam, but you're saying Matt's arm is shot? Yeah, I know. I had the same reaction. Why would you want to go from Matt Ryan to Cam Newton? But hey, I'll give you this. At least bringing back Cam, if this story's true, that is one hell of a recruiting tool that they've had over this past 3-4 months, because they brought in good tight ends. They brought in some depth wide receiver pieces. And if you can land Julio Jones Oh my God, that would be a fantasy team, at least because you get your number one receiver, you have two tight ends, and I have said here over the last couple of weeks that I think Mac Jones is your starter from day one. And it looks as though that might be the case because they did bring back Brian Hoyer, and Hoyer's not there to start. He crapped his pants when we got into the red zone against the Chiefs. So I don't think he's going to be the starter. They're bringing him in to be the mentor, the backup for Stidham, for Mac Jones to learn from because he's been in that system. So that's really what he's there for. So I think having Cam, though, might work out from the standpoint of a recruiting tool because if you can get a guy like Julio Jones, there's your stud. There's your number one. Yeah, he's 32, and I know everybody says he gets hurt, but just looking at how he plays through the injuries, and he's put up monster numbers being hurt. So this is one of those guys where it's like, well, my shoulder hurts. I'm going to sit out 2 weeks. This is a guy like, oh, I have a broken bone in my foot, but yet I'm going to go out there, put up, 200 yards, 15 catches, and a couple touchdowns. Or one game he had dealing with a foot injury, I believe it was 12 catches or 15 catches for over 300 yards receiving. So this guy plays through the injury. So all that BS, again, with him, with the injuries, and people are like, well, he's 32, he gets injured. This man has played with injuries throughout his whole career, his whole life, and he's been a stud. He's been a monster. So I'm not as worried about the injuries as other people are. I really think bringing him in would be a no-brainer. And it's not going to cost them a lot because, again, being 32, yeah, he's still technically in his prime, but that, as far as trade package-wise, you can use that against him. Be like, he's 32, we're not going to give up a lot. And last year, a younger DeAndre Hopkins went for a second-round pick. And he's younger than Julio. So you can't, if you're Atlanta, you can't ask for more than a number 2. And the other part of this is that Julio can't be moved until June 1st because of his contract hit. Because if they move him now, it's going to be in the neighborhood of $15 to $23 million that it would take off of the Atlanta cap and they'd be stuck with. But if they move him after June 1st, then it's only $7 million. And then it's whoever trades for him, it's only $11 million that it hits on your cap. So it's all good for you. So if you're the Patriots, wait until June 1st, trade for Julio, you get your number one, and you say, you kind of play it out over the offseason. You kind of show him, Cam's not too good anymore. Sorry, his arm's about as good as a 3-year-old trying to toss you the little rubber ball on the floor when you try to pass with them. He couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. And then you're like, oh, hey, look at our shiny new toy and Mac Jones over here. He's accurate. He's got a good arm. Yeah, he might not be Trevor Lawrence over there or somebody like a Zach Wilson who can throw 80 yards down the field, but you don't not need to throw 80 yards. If you can throw it 50 or 60 yards, is in most situations, that's a good deep ball. So, and he's accurate. So I really like what he brings to the table. Hey, you have Mac, and we have a super team. Well, I can't say super team now because we don't know how Mac's going to be, but you have a fantasy football team with the 2 number 1 tight ends and Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, and then you bring over Julio Jones. Man, that sounds really good. Now, obviously, you have to see how Mac Jones plays, and if he's as pro-ready as everybody says, those 3 targets right there, and then, you have Jacoby Myers, who's been pretty good. You brought back James White, and then you have Kendrick Bourne. You have Aguilar to be just another piece next to Julio in the tight ends. I mean, what more could you ask for? What a 26-year-old Julio? Yeah, that would be nice. But other than that, I mean, that's a microwave offense right there, even with a rookie who's ready to go, who is pretty much ready to go. So why wouldn't you want to make that trade? Tell me, why wouldn't you want to do that? And if you disagree with me, hit me up in the live chat or send me a tweet, send me a text, send me whatever, and we can discuss that. If we still have time left in this show or next week, we can get into that with Julio. But come on, that is a no-brainer right there to trade for Julio. So just wait till June 1st, wait another couple weeks, week and a half. Bam, you got Julio. And there's why wouldn't you want to do that? Like I said, he's a top, even at 32 years old, he's a top 10 receiver in this league, bar none. He might even be a top 5 still, hands down. And I love Julio. So that's that to me is a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you want to do this? And that really was not surprising that he wanted to get traded. But when I heard the tidbit, the nugget about him wanting to play with Cam, that's where I was like, maybe Belichick was onto something. Maybe he's not using him as a starting quarterback. He's using him as a recruiting tool. So when I heard that piece, I was like, maybe you're not so dumb after all. I know Belichick's not that dumb, but it's a joke, people. Get over it. Anyways, Belichick made a good move there, bringing back Cam as a recruiting tool, at least in my opinion, from that standpoint. As a quarterback, I'm done with him. I don't want to see him on the field. But if you can bring me Julio Jones, you can bring me the tight ends, which you already did. You did your job. You give him the $3.5 million. You say, have a nice summer, have a nice holiday, and maybe you can come back and you can do some TV work for us or something. But that's really all I want to see him as far as when it comes to game day in the fall. But as a recruiting tool, thank you, Cam. Wham bam, thank you, Cam. So if that's what you get out of him is two all-star tight ends and an all-pro Hall of Fame wide receiver, I'm all for it. So that will wrap things up for another episode of New England Sports Weekly. And next week, we will get into more of the Boston Bruins, as hopefully tonight they close the series out and they get that all-important series victory and move on up. And hopefully the Celtics maybe show a little bit of signs of life, maybe steal a game here or there. In the Red Sox, we'll talk more about their hot run, their hot start to the season as we get towards June, and maybe that bullpen will sort itself out. But in the meantime, all of you have a good rest of your week, and we'll be back next week on our regular schedule at Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. Until then, have a good one, everybody.